This video is sponsored by World Anvil. This year, I've been making the case that you should try to run some more episodic campaigns, and it seems I'm not the only one with modular content on the mind. Last year, Wizards of the Coast released their first new adventure book of the 5.5 edition, Dragon Delves, a collection of dragon-themed adventures that you can drop into your game wherever you like. This video isn't sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. They don't send me review copies, although if you want to, WotC, call me. But I paid for my own copy last year. I'm just now finally getting around to talking about it. And today, partially I'm going to offer a light review of the book based on my own perspective for whatever it's worth. But the main goal today is to figure out whether you could potentially try to run all of these adventures as a large campaign, or whether you'd be better off dropping these into your existing campaign. Let's talk about it.
Ahoy! Salty Jack here, and don't worry, if Mike can't recommend you get the book by spending your own doubloons, I'll make sure to remind you there's always another way to get it.
Thanks, Salty Jack. You're really undermining my anti-piracy message from my last video.
That's why I'm here. I mean, literally. Why else would I be here?
We'll talk about this later. For now, let's just get into the book. I realize I'm about 8 months late reviewing this book. You've probably already decided whether or not you want to pick up this book, but I think it's important to try to separate the value of this product from how well it suits today's exercise. So this is my review portion of the video. Overall, these adventures are okay. Some of them I really love. They're really fantastic. I was especially fond of the level 3 adventure, Baker's Doesn't, the level 10 adventure, Before the Storm, and the final adventure, the level 12 adventure, Dragons of the Sandstone City. The other adventures usually have a pretty good premise. There's just some other aspect of them that I feel like I would need to do a lot of work on to make them make sense for my game. Maybe there's an NPC motivation that just feels really thin to me, or there's a contrivance that keeps the story moving that I think my players would easily see through, or that I just don't feel like I'd be able to sell at the table. Something like that. But that's okay, because those are the kinds of things I feel very comfortable changing before I run an adventure. Maybe in the future, I might single out one of these adventures and prep it for my game, and I'll make a video demonstrating some of the ways I would actually change that adventure for my campaign. But that's not really the focus of today's video. I haven't really reviewed a whole lot of written adventures in the past, because honestly, it's tough to do that until I actually go through the process of prepping it and running it. I recently ran a third-party published dungeon for my players, and when I first read it, it seemed perfect. And then as I was prepping it, I found all these things that just didn't make any sense, and I had to adjust them before I ran the game. And then once we were actually playing, more things came up that didn't make any sense, and I had to improvise and self-justify them. That's kind of why I'm not going to spend a lot of time focusing on reviewing these, because I know that my perceptions of how they will run is not necessarily accurate for how they actually function once I implement them in a game. But I can talk about the parts that worry me the most, or that excite me the most. Like, there are a couple of adventures where I feel like the map kind of lets the adventure down, and those would be tougher for me to fix. One of the reasons I love pre-published adventures is because I think they design much better maps than I do. And this is not intended to be a slam against these designers, but there's a couple of maps in this book that just don't line up with what I thought the adventure was going for, or what I think would make the adventure work better. So I need to either reframe my approach to try to understand what adventure these designers are going for, or try to help them finish accomplishing what they were trying to accomplish, but with the map that they have. Or I would just have to tweak the map to make it better fit the version of the adventure that makes the most sense to me, that I want to run, and that I would have the most fun running for my players. And most of the time in this book, when I have an issue with a map, it's because it's too straightforward, because I think the design brief given to the artist was to make sure that the dungeon could be played through in a single session. And we'll come back to the pros and cons of that approach overall a little bit later, because I would argue it's the #1 selling point for this book. A bunch of adventures you could use in your game when you need to drop an unrelated adventure into your campaign, and you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, so it's going to last for 1 or 2 sessions. However, before we get there, while we're in the review portion of this video, I should say that I really love the art in this book. Each adventure has its own art style, and they are all very different. Some of the art is just fine. There's some art pieces that didn't drive me crazy, but there's none in here that I actively disliked. But I remember seeing the preview art for Baker's Doesn't, and I thought that was going to be my least favorite art in the book. But when you're reading it alongside the actual adventure, it's perfect. It absolutely sets the tone for how whimsical that adventure is, which is obviously what they're going for. But for some reason, just viewing it in the context of the book made me like it a whole lot more. And the art that I thought was going to be my favorite is still my favorite. The black and white hatch mark line art for Before the Storm, it's totally rad. I thought I was going to love that art before I read the book, and sure enough, I did. I was right. Honestly, my least favorite art in the book is not poorly made in any way. It feels like it could have come from any D&D book over the past 12 years, and it's just depicting NPCs rather than any really fantastical scenes from the adventure. But again, I don't blame the artist for that. That is a problem with the prompts that they were given. However, one place where the presentation for this book is not at all lacking is on the first page of each adventure, where we get this really useful breakdown of what to expect as a game master when you're running the adventure. It gives you the major plot points, the major characters, and every monster you're going to need, which is really nice. Sometimes when you're running a pre-written adventure, you can wind up getting blindsided by aspects you missed on your first read-through. Some plot detail you didn't catch, some names you mixed up, an NPC you set up but then couldn't actually figure out where they were located in the dungeon. So until you actually get to the room where they are, you can't set up their location in any way. You can't foreshadow it because you don't remember where they are. You never figured that out. And you might not know what monsters you're going to need in advance if you didn't take notes as you were reading the adventure, writing every one of them down. But this first page helps with all that stuff. I really appreciate it. It kind of helps answer everything that I struggle with when I'm prepping an adventure. You can't run this book without the other core rulebooks. That is a downside. It's not unexpected. But yeah, you need the Dungeon Master's Guide for a few traps and hazards and environmental effects, and you definitely need the Monster Manual for all the stat blocks. There are no new stat blocks in this book at all. And even having the system reference document from the Creative Commons is not going to be enough for all the monsters. You're going to need the Monster Manual. The book says to bookmark these monsters or save them on D&D Beyond as open tabs, and that's really what they want you to do. They want you to use D&D Beyond when you're running encounters. But if you're running in person, if you're anything like me, I don't necessarily want to have my laptop in front of me when I'm running behind the screen. Behind the GM screen, I don't want a laptop screen there as well. I have D&D Beyond on my phone, but I can only have a couple of tabs open at a time for different monsters. Ideally, we could have a PDF of the Monster Manual and print off the stat blocks we need, but we don't have that option. But if you're running in person and you're like me and you have the Monster Manual through D&D Beyond and you have a printer, I would just screenshot the stat blocks, drop them into a Word document, and print out the page of the stats you need. If you don't have D&D Beyond, you may have to take your Monster Manual into Staples and just photocopy the pages you need, or transcribe the stat blocks into your notes, which would be tedious, but doable. If you don't have a printer and you don't even have a laptop, worst case scenario, you can just use your phone, take screenshots of all the stat blocks on D&D Beyond that you might need for the game, or take pictures of the pages in your Monster Manual so you have them all open and available for you, and just swipe through your pictures when you're running a game at the table. Unfortunately, this is the best you can do without a PDF of the Monster Manual.
Well, you can get your hands on a PDF of the Monster Manual for free. It's not that hard.
Seriously, I am not advocating piracy.
Oh, really? Then why am I in this video?
Well, there's a bunch of pirates in some of these adventures. It's thematically relevant.
Sure. Wink.
Did you just say wink?
Yeah, I also winked, but you can't tell because of the eye patch.
Okay, go away. In fact, between the art and the way information is communicated to the GM, I have very few issues with the presentation of this book. Well, except for one thing. So the spines for every D&D book, starting with the 2014 Player's Handbook, were all exactly the same. Black spine with some red fire at the top. For a while, this would also include a little icon to essentially represent the product line that this book was tied into. So for example, the Out of the Abyss adventure was part of the Rage of Demons storyline. It has the Rage of Demons logo on the spine, and I believe on the front cover as well. And then that logo would also appear on any comics or promotional material for video games that were also tying into that story around the same time. So that icon appears on the spine of the book to let you know that it's part of that narrative push. But as they started doing that less and less often, and as fewer and fewer storylines or adventures would tie into any storylines or elements that had logos attached to them, they kind of just phased out that practice for the most part. But other than that, the spines have stayed exactly the same throughout 5th edition. Black with the red fire at the top. With 5.5, they flipped the colors for the new core rulebook spines. So, okay, very clear message being sent. This is a new edition, but it's very similar to the old one, so you can put them side by side, and they'll still feel like they're in conversation with each other. They don't feel as drastic as you might have seen as a switch between other editions. But for this book, for Dragon Delves, the spine is black with a red section, but instead of stylized flames, it just shifts from one to the other with a gradient. There's no flames at all. The Dragon Book spine does not include the flames, either black or red, that have been on all other D&D books for the past 12 years. And this is the standard cover. This is not the variant cover. I don't buy variant covers. And it doesn't match the line of books from 5th edition, and it also doesn't match the new core rulebooks from 5.5. Why? Why would they do this? Why would they do this to me specifically? Why am I personally being attacked by this art design? What did I ever do to you, Wizards of the Coast? Trick question, doesn't matter. Nothing I've ever done could ever deserve this treatment. What you've done to me specifically is cruel and wrong. But okay, returning back to the adventures themselves, each adventure is about a different kind of dragon. 10 adventures, and each adventure shines a spotlight on a different type of chromatic or metallic dragon. And as someone who really doesn't tend to like metallic dragons all that much, who just typically thinks of them as kind of boring characters whenever they show up in a story, because I think they rob the story of tension, I will say that most of these Metallic Dragon storylines are excellent. Sometimes the Metallic Dragons are victims that need to be saved. Other times they are enemies that you have to face, but they've simply been misguided or misled in some way, and you have to figure out why they're doing what they're doing and recruit them back to the side of good. And other times they are the antagonist, but their reasoning still makes sense. They're not misled, they're just opposed to your objective, and you have to deal with that. And that's the most interesting option. There are a couple of Metallic Dragon adventures that I would need to tinker with, maybe one that I'm not very interested in overall, but that's still 3 or 4 Metallic Dragon adventures that I would be excited to run in my own campaign, and that's basically never happened before. Additionally, I think they did take advantage of the fact that you can just fight dragons at nearly every level, and they made sure that there's chromatic dragon adventures across the spectrum of level ranges. You fight a green dragon wyrmling at level 2, an ancient blue dragon at level 12, and the other dragons fall at various points in the range between. The green dragon adventure is a little messy. I would definitely want to tinker with that one, but it's a promising start. There's some useful bones there. There's a pun in that sentence, which you will know if you've read the adventure. But the point is, it would be a really neat way to give the players a dragon fight early on, and that is nice. But if you don't like that idea and you want to save their first real dragon encounter, their first real dragon fight for later on to make sure dragons always feel like a significant threat, the Red Dragon Adventure is excellent. And then after that, we still get the white and black and blue adventures. Those are all really solid, and they're all higher and higher level. They're not perfect, but overall, when you have a much more straightforward villain like a chromatic dragon, it is a lot easier for the designers to have a little bit more fun with the rest of the adventure, because the villain is so clear. You always have a really solid goal for your players to defeat that villain, and that provides a stronger foundation to build your adventure upon. In fact, most of the issues I have across all these adventures, whether it's NPCs acting in a way that I don't believe, or maps that I think are underwhelming in some way, pretty much all of these can be traced back to the same problem. Every adventure in this book is designed to be run as a one-shot, or a two-shot, in 1 or 2 games. Every adventure says so right at the top. This adventure is designed to fill 1 or 2 sessions of play. And in the introduction, they're extremely clear. These are meant to be filler episodes. And that's the part I really do love. In the introduction, they literally say that you should try running these adventures as one-shots if you're trying GMing for the first time, or if your regular GM is sick. But if you do want to incorporate them into your campaign, they suggest you throw in an adventure to help fill time and get the players to a higher level so they can be ready for the big boss fight, or to serve as a palate cleanser in between story arcs, or to make travel more interesting by encountering one of these adventures along the way, almost like a random encounter. Or if you're just not prepared for the session, you need to drop in a pre-written adventure because you don't know what else to do. You have these as an option. But either way, the intention behind these adventures is extremely clear. The book refers to them as filler adventures. And that's awesome. I love that the publishers behind D&D are starting to present filler adventures, because that speaks to exactly what I've been talking about throughout all my videos this year, which is when you approach your game like an episodic story, having filler adventures is really, really helpful. Now, personally, I think these adventures are a little bit weaker for the fact that they are intended to be one-shots. There's lots of points in these adventures where I would want to flesh things out a little bit more and not try to rush the players to get to the final confrontation, because I did want them to take their time and really have the freedom to explore the space. But with the right group, if I knew that they were really well motivated, you may be able to run some of these adventures as a one-shot. It's definitely doable. But I think for a lot of these, you'd want to lose the inciting incidents. I think that's a major issue. A lot of the plot hooks for these one-shots take way too much time, and you could probably find a way to skip them. In fact, we'll come back to that a little bit later in the video. But I think if you spend too much time in the introduction, getting the characters on board with the premise for each adventure, hooking them in and selling them on what they're going to be doing for that session, that can take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to as long as 30 minutes. And the longer the setup takes, the less time you have for the finale. I've played in or run so many one-shots where we did not have enough time for the final fight, so when you get there, the final fight was almost resolved like a skill challenge, or the boss just had a lot fewer hit points, neither of which is terribly satisfying, and none of which I would ever want to do with a dragon. When I was younger, there wasn't really a huge consequence for going too long with a one-shot, other than you'd have a few players who have to run downstairs to feed the meter, or they have to check traffic to see what time they need to leave, or to catch a movie or whatever. But nowadays, if a session runs long, it may not literally be possible for players to stay any later than you agreed to, because they have, like, babysitters waiting for them or something. They have other tiny humans they're responsible for. So unless I was really certain that I had enough time to get through the entire story in a single session, either because I knew I had a long session scheduled or because I knew my players' playstyles and I know they're going to go through the adventure quickly, unless I'm in one of those two situations, I would really try to free myself of the expectation that any of these could be run in a single session. Because trying to frame them that way just means I'm going to end up rushing the end of the adventure, shortchanging the players, and not delivering a final boss fight. And then we're going to get an unsatisfying ending to what could otherwise be a really fun adventure. It is okay to really think about these as two-parters, and they can still be fun filler. It does kind of discount how often you can use them, right? If you're planning a two-shot, maybe you don't necessarily use it when a player is missing, but there's still a lot of opportunities to use these as filler adventures. They talked about a lot of those. I think they can still work in that context. Just try not to force them to be one-shots. Now, we're going to talk in a minute about trying to put these together into one full campaign, but let's be very clear. That's not how they're designed. These are designed so you can drop them directly into your game whenever you need one of these adventures, and that's honestly very valuable. As I've said, have been talking a lot this year about running episodic adventures and how you can link episodic adventures into seasons. In a minute, we're going to talk about whether these could work as a season of Dragon Adventures or the backbone of an entire Dragon campaign, because I have a lot of thoughts about that. But if you're running a different campaign and you just want some sort of filler adventure to break up the tension and give the players a break from the main storyline for a minute, these are perfect. Baker's Doesn't is a really fun hag-centric adventure that you can drop into the middle of your low-level season. Maybe you can give your hag information about your big bad, like the real big bad, or the people in town will help you with something once you've dealt with this problem for them. But even if it was just an interstitial adventure in the middle of a story arc that literally has nothing else to do with anything else, Baker's Doesn't still has the potential to be an all-time favorite installment in your campaign because it is just a really fun adventure. Not every beloved adventure has to move the main narrative forward. You can still have episodic adventures that stand on their own, and some of them will be totally beloved, even though the main big bad does not appear in any of them. Like most of my favorite episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Halloween, Band Candy, Hush, Once More with Feeling, have almost nothing to do with the big bad of the season, or the big bad might make an appearance, or they're mentioned offhand, but they're not the ones driving the main story of the episode. These are the very definition of filler, and the same would be true for these adventures. But it would also be incredibly fun to run these. I really want to run Baker's Doesn't. Now, it is a little bit different with D&D. I want to be honest about that, about how filler works in D&D, because most players still want to feel like there's a clear reason to go on any given adventure. We talked about this recently when we talked about Funhouse Dungeons, but fortunately, with just one line at the beginning of any given adventure, you can make a standalone adventure essential to your main plot. If you're going to go speak with the Oracle, you're going to need the coin of Archimedes, and that's in the possession of this NPC. And when you know it, they just got shipwrecked. Could you go please see what you can do about that? Something fishy going on over there. Yes, of course I can write you the letter that you need to meet the king. But first, I need you to do something for me and go save this gold dragon who got captured by a hag. Now you have an excuse for the main characters to go on this otherwise completely unrelated adventure. You have a very loose connection to the main plot that you can exploit to motivate them to go on this quest. Otherwise, you can just literally drop the adventure in front of the players. They're on their way through town. Oops, the town's in the middle of a disaster. You're not going to leave these people to suffer, are you? That's literally how one of these adventures begins. Another one starts with the heroes passing through a canyon and they hear a voice calling out for help. It's the very definition of, hey, here's a side quest. Want to take a side quest? Now, you know your players better than I do. If you think your players need more motivation than that, you can take some of the earlier suggestions I gave about including a small detail that links the adventure to your larger plot. But you might not need that. Like right now in my current campaign, I have one player who will jump at the chance to do anything, because he has correctly deduced that if they take the bait and go on an unrelated side quest or check out a random dungeon, they'll get more rewards. It'll be a better reward than they get for the main plot storyline. But the other players are much more invested in the main narrative, and they don't like taking a detour from that if they don't have to. For them, all they need to hear is that they might be able to get something they want from one of these locations that ties into the main plot, and then they would be totally hooked. But they need that connective tissue. For them, if I was running these adventures, I really would need to make sure there was some connection to the main plot. But for that one player who's playing the bard, he'd be fine with whatever. If there was just some random clue that there's some dungeon somewhere or someone who needs help, he'd go do it. But my favorite example of how these adventures feel like filler episodes of a TV show is that one of them literally starts in an area famous for its hot springs. You start the episode with the players thinking they're going on a fun, no-stakes, hot springs vacation, and they get there and, fire, devastation, dragon. Guess you gotta go on an adventure. So many of these adventures can just be dropped into your game whenever you need them. Most of them just take place in a forest or a desert. There are a few adventures that have a little bit more description of the surrounding environment, more requirements for where the adventure actually takes place, but it would not be that difficult to build these details into your campaign map, either at the beginning of the campaign, with the knowledge that this adventure is waiting in that corner whenever they find themselves there, or as they get over there, you can just say, yeah, this wasn't on the map, but there's like a hill, and on the other side of that hill, there's a temple. It's not on your map, but it's there, I promise. Remember, I said earlier that each adventure opens with a disclaimer, basically. Not the disclaimers that I missed from 2014 D&D, but just a statement that says that these can be played in 1 or 2 sessions. But there's a second line that always says something like, it can take place in any heavily forested region, or it might start in any rural community with near hills or mountains, that kind of thing. And so that makes it really easy for you to just put it anywhere in your world that makes sense. And that's the other nice thing. Most of these adventures are setting agnostic. They're not tied to any particular settings like Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms. Like, most pre-published adventures have been for the past 12 years. There's one adventure that takes place in a pre-published D&D setting, but it would be pretty easy to change it and move it somewhere else. Like, for example, one adventure has an NPC who is a priest of, quote, a god of stars and wanderers. In your own campaign, you can just decide which god fits that description and make them a priest of that god. That's a lot easier than the approach I've seen in most published adventures, where a character will be a priest to a specific god from Greyhawk, for example, and then it's your job to research that god and figure out what they're the god of, and then swap them out with whatever god makes the most sense for your own setting. That's just kind of tedious, it's extra work, and this is a lot cleaner. Although I will point out, that is the adventure that takes place in a pre-published setting. They still made it agnostic enough that you can just deploy it in your own world, which I appreciate. But fun fact, that setting is one of the worlds from Journeys to the Radiant Citadel. And that's really cool. This is a side note, but I'm really glad to see those settings continue to be used in D&D products. When that book came out, I was actually pretty worried that they were just going to publish this interesting project with this huge team of diverse writers and then never do anything with it again. Just let that setting exist as its own, very literal pocket universe disconnected from the rest of the wider canon of D&D and move on. So I'm really glad it's getting acknowledged as a setting for another adventure in this larger anthology book. That's really cool. But you could still very easily adapt this adventure to take place in your own campaign world. It would not be difficult at all. And if you have your own campaign setting that you use for your games, you're going to need some way to track the details of that setting and present them to your players. Which brings me to today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is a wonderful online toolkit that you can use to record all the information about your campaign setting and share it with your players. You can create wiki-style articles about NPCs, monsters, magic items, nations, gods, and so much more. Whether your game takes place in a homebrew setting of your own design or a pre-existing official campaign setting like the Forgotten Realms, you can use your World Anvil page to present the most important elements of your world and share them with your players. And if you still have some secrets you don't want to share with your players yet, you can hide them on your World Anvil pages and include details the players can't see. And then, as the players uncover answers to their big mysteries, you can reveal those details on the World Anvil page. And you can also nest stat blocks in your World Anvil page and roll your dice through the website, which is really convenient. If you don't want to print off a bunch of stat blocks or save screenshots on your phone, World Anvil can actually be a really efficient way to keep track of your monster stat blocks, even more so than some of the other virtual tools that the folks at Wizards of the Coast would really like you to use, because you can put these stat blocks on the page that also has all of your other notes about that villain or that monster and how they tie into the history of your campaign setting. So World Anvil actually directly solves the exact problem I was lamenting earlier in this very video. And if you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code supergeek at checkout, you can save 51% off of any annual membership. That's more than half off. Once again, that's worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code supergeek. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. But okay, I've been making videos all about structuring your campaign like a season of TV, with some episodes that are connected to the overarching main plot and others that are just filler. We know the adventures in this book can work as filler. Can we make this campaign work if we treat it as the main storyline instead? I've seen some people argue that your players might get tired of fighting dragons if that's the whole campaign, so to them, it would not work as the backbone of your campaign. But the easy fix to that is that you include other adventures in between these adventures. These dragon adventures are the main storyline. You could find filler adventures somewhere else to populate the rest of your campaign with other episodic adventures that are not dragon themed and not based around dragon fights. So whenever we come back to the main storyline, that's when we're dealing with dragons, and there's other diversity in other adventures. I think it's a very solvable problem. The real question is, can we figure out a story engine that we can use to connect all these adventures to each other? Maybe it's a central bad guy, or a core mystery, or a clear mission, or a big bad evil guy you're dealing with the entire time. If we have a strong story engine, we can actually ditch some of the existing plot hooks. For example, in For Whom the Void Calls, the players are traveling through a canyon when they get a psychic message from, apparently, a sentient bag of holding, and this bag can communicate with them when they pass within a mile. That works perfectly if this is just a random episodic installment in a larger campaign. But if you have a reason for the players to go to each individual dragon location, you can toss out the existing plot hooks and come up with something more relevant to your campaign. And the book presents 3 options. And 2 of them, just my opinion here, but they kind of completely do not work with these adventures. See, 2 options are very similar to each other because they require the players to track down a bunch of other dragons in order to put things in their hordes. In Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, there are rules for how to steep a magic item in a dragon horde to give it power. Just adding a magic item to a horde overnight so it can soak up the dragon's inherent magic. So one suggestion for a campaign structure is that the players go to a bunch of hordes looking to take these specific magic items from some of the early adventures and awakening their power by adding them to various dragon hordes. There's another option that's very similar. In the final adventure, Chapter 10, the players receive a brass dragon egg at the beginning of the adventure. So this framing device proposes the players actually get this egg near the beginning of the campaign, and they're trying to take it to all these different hordes to steep it in the hordes of 10 dragons, one of each chromatic and metallic type. When this occurs, the egg will crack open and give the players some extra magic. In the adventure, that magic is meant to be used to defeat the final boss, but we'll come back to that a bit later on. Now, I do like the egg plot. It almost works. Might require a little bit more work, but it's manageable. But both the egg and the horde plot hooks have the same problem. For some of these adventures, the presence of a dragon is a secret. Like for The Will of Orcus, it's actually a major reveal that there's a dragon involved in this adventure at all. Now again, maybe it's worth losing out on that reveal in order to build a cohesive campaign that you know every adventure is tied into dragons. Like, you could absolutely make that case. But it's kind of weird that the suggestion from the book on how you can make these adventures work together presents a pretty big issue if you actually try to do that. For the egg scenario, the book suggests maybe the players might receive dreams that guide them towards the next adventure, so that would help a lot. But there's nothing like that for the magic item scenario at all. But there's one more suggestion for how to connect these adventures together. A mysterious patron recruits the players to go on these adventures. The patron might take any form you choose: a kindly teacher, a scatterbrained elder, a handsome monk, etc. And they also might be accompanied by 7 golden canaries, because this is actually the dragon god Bahamut. Those canaries are gold dragons in disguise. And so Bahamut is sending you out on all these missions because he's trying to get you to help out these metallic dragons and vanquish these chromatic dragons. The book even says when there might be an adventure that doesn't seem to be about dragons, the patron might be surprised by that, but it's all part of his master ruse because he actually knows the dragons are involved. Now, I don't hate this by any means, but this is a tricky option for a couple of reasons. First of all, I just talked about this on my recent video about silliness in D&D, but I'm very hit and miss on the idea of an incredibly powerful, benevolent being who just chooses not to tell the players who they are, can't really intervene in human affairs even though they kind of can, and sends the parties on these missions for larger nebulous goals. I'm not saying it can't work. I've seen it work really well. But I do feel like it raises more questions than it answers. If you're the god of the dragons, why are you coming to these heroes in particular? The only good answer is that they are the heroes of fate, the ones you know are going to be able to solve this problem. And every other answer I've ever seen, any other attempt I've seen to answer that question in any way besides fate, has always felt really unsatisfying, because it all hinges on coincidence or some other element of, like, they're chosen ones for some other reason. The book even says the same thing about Bahamut. They say, quote, "Perhaps seeing that they are destined to become mighty heroes, Bahamut takes the adventurers under his metaphorical wing and sends them on adventures to deal with draconic concerns, great and small, across the world." You kind of have to sell it on the idea of destiny, right? Because otherwise this concept just does not make a ton of sense. Additionally, if the story is that you sometimes get missions from the dragon god to go on these epic adventures, we're missing a final act. We're missing a payoff where the players find out what they were working towards. What was it all for? Is there a moment where Bahamut says, "Congratulations, you did it. You solved my dragon puzzles." Or even, "Look, I'm glad you were able to help, but now I need you for one last ride." As it stands right now, we don't have that. I mean, you could do that with the Blue Dragon finale, but the problem is, can we make sure there's a way to make each of these adventures actually move the main story forward, besides just being about dragons? Because I'm thinking about that comment that I've seen a lot about this book. The players will get bored of fighting dragons. First of all, that's sort of an indictment of the design of dragons, that they all feel so similar that your players will get bored fighting them. It almost sounds like we're saying that dragons are just big bags of hit points with an occasional breath weapon and a fear mechanic, and that they don't really do a good job of capturing the core fantasy of the monster. But that's a larger topic. And honestly, that's something we could adjust as we adapt our adventure for our games. If you think dragons are boring because of their mechanics, there are plenty of resources out there that you can use to make your dragons a lot more dangerous and unique. But also, when I was a player in a Storm King's Thunder campaign, I didn't get bored fighting lots of giants. A giant is absolutely just a big bag of hit points, and I think they're even worse because they lack the exciting breath weapon attacks, and they lack the ability to fly and radically change the encounter in that way that a dragon can. Despite the mechanics, we didn't get bored. That's a major testament to our game master doing such a good job with the adventure and making sure each fight had a lot of tension and stakes. Or maybe it's only because I got bored only when I ran out of runes for my rune knight, because I'm actually a wizard player and I didn't know it yet. So effectively, when I lost the equivalent of spell slots, that's when I mentally checked out. But the point is, this is not an insurmountable obstacle. You can use the same monsters over and over without your players getting bored. They just have to feel like they're actually making progress through the story. That's the important part. That's the benefit of the egg scenario or the horde scenario. Both of them give the players a reason to run around the countryside looking for dragons, and a specific list of things they need to do that has an endpoint. In fact, the very fact that there is an endpoint to that objective is kind of an underrated benefit of going with that approach, because that way the players are encouraged to track down every lead they can find, but like a Pokemon collector, you've got a very obvious finish line. But also, your players are going to need to trust that you're going to put all these different dragons in front of them. After all, Pokemon only works because the player knows that if they just passively wander the world following all the quest lines, they will encounter each type of Pokemon. They may just have to hunt around in the grass a little bit for certain types, but all of them will be on the road somewhere. Likewise, your players need to trust that if they're looking for different types of dragons, you're going to put those dragons in front of them at some point. And it would definitely make them feel better if you could give them some sort of assurance that that's going to be the case. Ideally, weaving it into the story in some way. Which means we need a story engine, a reason that there are all these different types of dragons that you need to go deal with. Which kind of means we're back where we started. So either you urge your players to trust you that you will put these dragons in front of them, or give them a different goal with a more concrete finish line. After all, the Pokemon games are not really about collecting all the pocket monsters, they're about going on a quest. The end goal for Pokemon Red Blue is facing the Elite Four and fighting your rival one last time. And in D&D, we tend to replicate this by putting one central evil villain in front of our players. I think that might be the best way to connect all these adventures. After all, if you make the players feel like they're taking steps against a big bad, then even if a given adventure isn't explicitly connected to the big bad's plans, each quest can still be linked to the player's efforts to fight him, or learn more about him, or do something else in giving someone a favor in the hopes that they might help your mission to defeat the big bad. So, can we come up with a core villain working behind the scenes throughout this campaign? Well, I have a few ideas. First of all, we have 2 adventures in a row that feature or reference the Gith. That's great. I think that's just there because Gith have such a strong connection to dragons in their lore, but in one of these adventures, there's a point where you can just have a Gith knight appear and start stalking you through the dungeon. That is a next level way to introduce a villain. It reminds me of the Hands of Blue guys from Firefly, or Matt Bomer's character in The Nice Guys. Someone who got the call to come check out this mysterious going on, and as soon as they show up, you're like, oh fuck, we are not prepared for this guy. And my feeling is, why waste that villain introduction on a one-off bad guy? Maybe this Gith Knight gets away, or the players get away from him, and he can show up again in a future adventure. Or maybe the players do manage to kill the Gith Knight, but this still alerts the players to the presence of the Gith. Or maybe this alerts the Gith to the presence of the players. That was kind of the premise of both Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis. This emergency signal basically draws the attention of this ancient, powerful faction of bad guys who've been off doing their own thing for who knows how long, but now they're going to start taking a lot more of an interest in this little corner of the material plane. You'd have to add a lot more detail to flesh it out, and especially you need to add in your own adventures in between these dragon quests, but you could absolutely spin a Gith arc out of these dragon adventures. But the problem with this is, well, most of these adventures are not about the Gith. They're about dragons, which is good, I like that, but it doesn't really help us in this case. The Gith could just be a subplot, and we'll talk more in a future video about having multiple subplots with different villains at the same time going on throughout your campaign. Or this could be the moment that takes us away from doing dragon-centric adventures and moves us into Season 2, which is a Gith story. That could work really well as well. But either way, we haven't really solved the question of how to link all these dragon adventures together. So a second option is to have multiple villains taking advantage of a new status quo. For example, maybe you do go with get the egg early in the scenario. I think you need to change the way they get the egg. The scene where they actually get the egg in the adventure is terrible, but that's fine. They get the egg at the beginning of the campaign. But maybe there was an ancient metallic dragon who watched over this entire region, keeping it safe, protecting other metallic dragons, and waiting for the return of any chromatics, and preparing to fight them if they came back. Or preparing to fight the Gith if they came back. But then this ancient dragon vanished recently, and all we have is this egg. Or maybe even forget the egg. The ancient metallic dragon was killed. There is the body of an ancient metallic dragon in the last adventure, so this could be someone that we set up very early in the campaign, and we know that they're gone from very early in the campaign now. But now it's like a mystery. Where's the ancient metallic dragon who used to protect this valley? And over time, the players can discover that this dragon was killed, and who killed them, which obviously I just spoiled is in the finale of the final adventure. But okay, that would actually give us our big bad. The villain of the final adventure is the one who killed the dragon and kind of set everything else into motion. All this other stuff that's happening throughout this campaign is happening because the metallic dragon who used to watch over this area, this large region of the world, is dead. And as you're trying to figure out what happened to them and you're trying to track down clues that will lead you to the final adventure, along the way you're encountering all these other adventures that are happening purely because the guardian of this region is dead. And so metallic dragons that used to have protection from this ancient metallic dragon, well, now they're all in danger, and thus they're being kidnapped or manipulated or swayed in some way, or they're looking for new layers, and that's leading them into conflict with other factions. Meanwhile, chromatic dragons are starting to return to this area because the guardian who used to keep them out is gone. Now let's come back to the egg. Maybe this is the egg of the metallic dragon, or maybe this is the egg of the metallic dragon. Like, the metallic dragon was actually shapeshifted back into an egg. That may be going overkill, but I did that once in my campaign, and it was fun. But once you then steep that egg in the hordes of 10 different kinds of dragons, it will break the curse and restore this metallic dragon, turning them back into the guardian who protected this region of the world, and you've saved the day. Or maybe this is just the dragon's egg. This is their offspring, but this ritual will still cause the egg to hatch and become a mighty ancient dragon, their child who rises up and takes their place, protecting the region just as its parent did. And that can actually work really well because I had already established in another video of mine that maybe dragons have genetic memories. So an egg will actually remember the entire life and memories of its parents, and that means that you wouldn't be robbing this egg of their childhood. They would basically be stepping into the role of their parent with all the knowledge and memories of their parent. That can work really well with what I already established in my other video, which, again, I invented, but I think it would work really well. I think you could use that really well. So I think that big bad would work really well. You take the big bad from the final adventure, they killed the metallic dragon, and because of that, this whole region is unsafe, and what you're trying to do is restore peace to the region by basically calling in reinforcements, the authorities who've been able to keep the dragons out so far in the past, which is this ancient metallic dragon. But there is one more idea that I really like, one more option for a villain for a bunch of dragon adventures, and that's a Draco-Lich. The first adventure says that the locals believe a Draco-Lich might be responsible for what's going on, and I kind of hate that. After all, it's one thing if an episode of Scooby-Doo has the locals believing that there's a big monster, and that's actually a lot worse than the truth, which is just, it's a land baron or whatever. That's the whole format of Scooby-Doo, and it's really satisfying to watch these monsters get unmasked and revealed to be charlatans and usually rich dips. But this is D&D. All the ghosts and things from Scooby-Doo are just superstition, but in D&D they're 100% real. And so I tend to dislike Scooby-Doo style stories in D&D. I think they can be well done, but they're hard to pull off. On the other hand, I love when the locals have their own rumors about what's going on, and that those rumors can be wrong, because I love the idea that the locals have their own superstitions that don't necessarily reflect the accurate analysis of what you would find in the monster manual. And so sometimes they just guess what kind of monster it is, and they're wrong. However, this is kind of my rule of thumb for Scooby-Doo stories in D&D. The rumors can still be wrong, but the truth should at least be as interesting as the rumors were. Otherwise, your players will wonder, well, hey, why can't we fight the monster we were looking forward to fighting? That sounded fun. That's why I'm not wild about the Draco-Lich theory at the beginning of the first adventure. However, maybe instead of being a red herring that your players might hear and get their hopes up for what they're going to fight and then get disappointed when they fight a wormling instead, maybe this can be foreshadowing for the real villain of this campaign. I mean, they literally put a Draco-Lich on the cover of the new Dungeon Master's Guide. It's behind those other guys, but it's there. So, like, it would be fun to use a Draco-Lich. I love Draco-Liches, and clearly they do too. So maybe there's a bunch of stuff going on, and it's all related to the master plan of a Draco-Lich. That's what's causing all the commotion throughout this campaign. Or a dragon is trying to become a Draco-Lich. Or maybe there's some cultists who are trying to find the soul jar of a Draco-Lich in one of these other dungeons because they knew it would wind up in one of these other dungeons, and once they find it, they'll basically be able to free this other Draco-Lich, and that means that any NPCs you want can be part of this cult, or you can choose new ones to move the cult storyline forward in any of these adventures. And maybe there's a list of these dungeons, and someone has that list, and you get your hands on it, and now you have these potential locations where you know the cult is going to, and also maybe they're going to find the gem of the dragon, and of course it's probably going to be the last one the players go to, but now you have this sort of sandbox of dragon adventures for the players. And honestly, with all these pitches I've thrown at you of all these different scenarios, you could mix and match. Like maybe your players have to deal with a cult at early levels, then they have to fight the Gith for a while in both those two adventures and also maybe other ones you come up with or find somewhere else. Then they have to deal with the ancient blue dragon for the last couple of adventures, and then it's the Draco-Lich after they get past level 12. Or maybe the players are investigating this dead ancient metallic dragon, and the Gith also come through their portal and they realize, oh, the metallic dragon who once protected this region is gone, let's make a new incursion into this land. And so you have two threats you're dealing with simultaneously. Or you could have any of these adventure villains also escape at the end of the adventure, and if they get away, they graduate to become a recurring villain. And if that happens again, they become a new big bad. And we'll talk more about that idea very, very soon. That just happened in one of my games, and it ruled. But in all these scenarios, you'd really have to invent a ton more content to fill the rest of the campaign, but that's kind of the best you're going to get. After all, this book is not really meant to be a standalone campaign. You're meant to rate it for parts. If you want to turn it into a dedicated dragon campaign, yeah, you're going to have to put in some elbow grease. And that got me thinking about the other adventure anthologies Wizards of the Coast has released in the past 12 years of D&D. I remember playing through some of Tales of the Yawning Portal. That was the campaign where we had to deal with Thaco, the extra-dimensional imp I talked about in my recent video. But I haven't personally read the whole book. I also read a little bit of Ghosts of Saltmarsh because I wanted to rate it for parts, but I got really excited about what it would actually look like as a full campaign, so I never did anything with it, because that's how my brain works. Oh, I can't steal from this now because I want to run the entire thing later, so I'm just going to do neither. That makes sense. That's smart. So maybe down the road, maybe even later this year, I'll do more videos about these other adventure compilations. And maybe Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. I actually got that as a gift from an audience member a long time ago, and I never did anything about it. I never made a video about it. I should really talk about it on the channel at some point, right? But for this one, I don't know how well it works as a full campaign. I have ideas for what I could do with it, but honestly, I think I would be much better served breaking it up and using it for pieces of other campaigns, putting it into the middle of Tales from the Yawning Portal or Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, for example. But that only makes the most sense to do if you are running lots of campaigns. Otherwise, you don't need that many adventures from this book. So you're getting a book that you're going to be using one adventure for a campaign once, and then maybe you'll use another one, another campaign 2 or 3 years down the road. If you're that invested in running D&D, and you know you're going to be running a lot of campaigns in the future, and not running a lot of games in other systems, which is not necessarily true for everybody these days, if you know you're going to be using it, yeah, check out the book, pick it up. If you really want to run a dragon campaign, absolutely, check it out. You're going to have to do some work, but it's doable. But if all you want are a couple filler adventures, there may be other resources where you can find those. Maybe hold off on this one. I just don't know if it's worth the money.
Ah, but this might be the perfect prize to plunder and hoard. After all, if you don't want to pay for it, I have another option.
All right, that's enough. I don't want to encourage people to pirate anything. So you know what? You need to get out of here.
Or what?
Or, you know what? Or I'll make you leave.
I'd like to see you try.
Well, I think I'd like that too.
Avast me hearties.
All right. Let's do this. You and me are going to duel. We're going to do this. We're going to fight to the death. Thanks so much for watching, and next week, I'm going to be doing Monster Week videos. I'm hoping to do 2 videos for Monster Week. That is the plan. Will it happen? We'll find out. But you know what's also definitely going to happen is my Patreon live stream, which is right here on screen. This is the time. And you know what? I'm going to say it out loud. I'm going to say the time out loud. Here I go. Wednesday, April 29th at 2 p.m. Pacific. Wow, I sure am excited for that thing that I've definitely scheduled, and I better have scheduled by the time this video comes out. I don't have anything else to say. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. I hope you liked this video. I hope this was helpful to you. And if it wasn't, let me know that in the comments. Let me know and say, this was a waste of my time, just like a filler episode. And if you like this video, say, I really enjoyed this filler episode. Yeah, that works. I think that makes sense. Until next time, play fair. And have fun. And watch this video. And have fun. And play fair. And watch this video. And have fun.